Hello, everyone, and welcome to Writers Drinking Coffee. This is a podcast where writers sit around drinking tasty beverages and talking about writing, publishing, and the whole creative process. There will be rants and raves and opinions that may not agree, but are lovingly delivered. We do not censor ourselves, so consider us PG-13. Your pro fan base today includes Chaz and Karen Brenchley, and me, Ginny Warner. This is episode 181, interview with David Gerrold. David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It's kind of, I'm still in COVID mode. I don't go out unless I have to, but that was my behavior before there was a pandemic. I don't go out unless I have to. So anytime I get a chance to interact with real human beings without having to leave my house, it's like, I'm in heaven. It's great. So thank you.
It's ideal. And I think all of us here at WDC, I know I follow you on social media, part of your Patreon, right? My co-host, Karen, didn't you join his writing class one?
Oh, yes. I was in his writing class until I had knee surgery. And yeah.
Yeah, well, we miss you. And I hope you'll be able to come back. But more important, take care of yourself first.
Thank you.
Well, David, you were an indelible part of my childhood. I want you to know that I had slee-stack dreams for a decade in there.
Well, then I got my job done.
Absolutely. And clearly you influenced Kevin Smith in the same way, because in his Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, there was federal wildlife marshal Willenholly.
How wonderful.
And I just needed you to know that somebody even made a fake LinkedIn profile for a modern version of Marshall Willenholly out there, who is the principal owner at Technical Systems of New York.
Oh, I'll have to look for that. Let me tell you about the slee stacks. We needed they hadn't been in the original concept. And I thought we really need a continuing threat. And so I said, we're going to have this lost city and there's these lizard men. And I described what I wanted the costumes to look like, with the big insect eyes. And we, the tallest people we could, and we put them on foot-high stilts, and we built up the headdress so they were 9 feet tall. And the first time I saw the three basketball players on set in costume, it was terrifying. Now, I mean, they were scary as hell just in person. And the interesting thing was that we couldn't have them do any overt violence. So we went to that thing that they did in that 1953 movie, Invaders from Mars, where the Martians, which were just guys in velour suits, went lumbering up and down the corridors, the Martian corridors. So we did that with our slee stacks, lumbering up and down the caves. And very rarely do you see them actually doing anything awful. It's all in the imagination. But
episode 2, they do kidnap Will and Holly briefly and hang him in that hanging basket.
Very briefly. But we had these limits.
Didn't that influence them later for Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom? Because I'm fairly certain that was clearly where everybody got that from.
I don't know. It's like Spielberg does not pick up the phone and call me and ask for advice. So,
well, he should. He should.
Yes, he should. Spielberg, his people took the Martian Child story to him 3 times and said, "You really should do this." And he didn't even read it. He said, "No, I've already done E.T. Why should I do another one?" It's like, oh, God.
Fools.
He would have been the right one for it, because he had the right, he's still alive. He still has the right sensibility for actors and children, which very few directors really tap into that as well as he does.
Well, almost everybody on the planet, if they didn't know you from Land of the Lost and the Slee Stacks, many know your work with Star Trek via The Trouble with Tribbles. In fact, my stepsister we referred to as the Golden Tribble. It was in the 60s you helped shape Star Trek's Federation of Planets into social justice warriors in space. And so I feel it's your episode, The Cloudminders, that is the most stunningly relevant today.
Well, that started as an outline called Castles in the Sky. And I was very, very concerned. Dr. King had spoken that the big challenge for America in the 60s was poverty. And he was shifting the direction of his movement from civil rights to poverty, ending poverty for all people. And Lyndon Johnson was paying attention because he'd grown up in poverty. And we were very much aware that there was a caste system, an economic caste system of haves versus have-nots. And so Castles in the Sky was about those who lived in the castles in the sky and were totally unaware of what it was like. The laborers down below were working themselves to death so a privileged few could have a little luxury. And the weird thing is that as pertinent as that message was in the 60s, it's even more pertinent today, which is one of the reasons writers and actors are on strike, which we'll talk about at length.
Exactly, because those executives in the cloud were preventing the people who were working and dying from joining them. So they rendered it challenging to get ahead to make sure the workers could not enjoy a share of the profits of their labors that was poisoning them.
Well, it's in the Bible. It's in the Bible. Don't bind the mouth of the mule who treads out the grain.
Exactly. Do not keep them from filling his belly.
Yeah, I mean,
did you have thoughts of Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Stanford and other robber barons as you were writing that episode?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't remember that I was thinking of anybody in particular, but I was thinking about the fact that we had, I don't know that we had billionaires back in the 60s, but we had multimillionaires and people who simply didn't seem to understand what it's like to be worrying about your next meal. And now my family started out, I didn't know we were poor. We had food on the table every night. And my dad worked us up to a healthy middle class by being one of the most successful photographers in LA. When I got out on my own, I had a year of near poverty where there were a couple nights where I did not have enough money to put food on the table. And there were a couple of times when I was worried about being able to make the rent. So I did manage. It was easier then to find work that you could at a living wage where you could support yourself. And I was able to do that until I got my writing career back on track. But for a while there, I understood what it meant to worry. And there's this thing that happens when you've been there. You don't want to go back. Not only that, you understand what it's like for everybody else who's there. And I think some of our multimillionaires, CEOs, have no understanding of what it is to go to the store and not know if you can afford milk for the kids, and not know what the price of a quart of milk. They don't know. I remember when I was raising my son, I could buy a week's worth of groceries for $20 or $30 and we were fine. Now I can't even buy a day's worth of groceries for $20 or $30.
If you've had the taste of instant milk in your mouth.
Yep.
I wish you hadn't said that because the memory came back.
Oh, yeah. I know
I'm
that
sipping
one.
my coffee to get that taste out, Karen. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I drink my coffee black. Occasionally I will put half a spoonful of sugar in it, occasionally real cream, but I don't do any of the artificial stuff. And my son is even more fanatic about it than I am. So
I bought an espresso machine because I cannot afford my latte habit commercially.
Yeah.
So I fall under Captain Vimes. My boots have to be expensive enough.
Yeah.
I did not realize until I was in graduate school where I was poor too, that we were poor when I was younger, because the only things that I could afford to buy in graduate school were the things I grew up eating, which was like for a quarter, you could buy a can of tuna, of tuna. Okay. And things like, powdered milk, you add water to it and stuff, things like that. But I never knew it because mom was such a good cook. And she grew up poor. And so she knew how to make things taste really good.
Yep. My parents grew up in the Great Depression. And so, my mom never failed to put a great dinner on the table. I always thought we ate great. And only looking back on it, I realized how she scrimped and saved and made every penny count. I thought a dish of Jell-O with a little cream poured over it was a great dessert. It's actually a very cheap dessert, but we had salad, we had a hamburger or sometimes lamb chops, peas, mashed potatoes, and something, and ice cream. And I thought I thought we were doing great. I didn't know we weren't rich. But you put a good meal on the table and you are halfway home towards being middle class, a good meal on the table. And
I tell you, there was a social media thing out there that said the 7 secrets of highly successful people is private school, legacy, Ivy admission, nepotism hires, seed capital from family, club memberships, personal assistants, and journalists who ask what your secrets and just publish the answer without being critical about it.
Yeah, I saw that one. It made me laugh. Over here, the secret of success is keep pushing, be committed, work hard, find out what you have to do to solve the problem, and be willing to fail. I failed more than like Babe Ruth, his batting average was, 300, right? That meant he missed 2 out of every 3 pitches. He struck out. He was the strikeout king.
I like to point out that the most successful running back in history, and I tell this to my hockey girls when I'm coaching them, the one who has the most points racked up also has the highest number of fumbles. They just give him the ball more often.
Yeah.
So that's the secret, is how do you get your hands on the ball more often, which leads me to a question of, all right, once upon a time when you got into the WGA, it was a little bit different, and one can join a prestigious union now.
Well, there were only 4,000 members of the WGA 3,000 when I joined. And
how many are there now?
I think something like 15,000. I don't know the exact number, and I apologize, but it's way more.
Well, Christy Marks, when she was on, was telling us things that we didn't know about. Hey, it's interesting. I didn't realize they had so many writers working on each show. It's not just,
way back when, the Screenwriters Guild, it came into existence because it was the Radio Writers Guild, and television, all of a sudden was using a lot of the same shows and scripts. Jack Benny, My Favorite Husband, I forget, but a lot of those, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, a lot of the CBS dramas, the same scripts were adapted because they had them, they owned them. And the WGA was formed in the 50s, and the studios did not want a writers' union. And I knew people who were beaten up by studio goons, and I honor them. That first decade, all the shows were half-hour shows because that was what you got on radio. And then the networks discovered that it was cheaper to do an hour show because the second half hour of a show, you amortize the cost of the sets, the costumes, the props, the actors, the script, and it was 40% of the cost of doing a second half hour show. So we got hour-length shows. Some of them did not work, like Twilight Zone and Alfred Hitchcock, but other shows like Gunsmoke and other Westerns worked very well in the hour format. But from the writer's point of view, and this is the point I wanted to make, is in the 50s and 60s, there weren't a lot of people who understood how to write for television. It was a very different form than movies. And so the story structure of the half-hour show, they knew that from the radio, but they didn't know the hour structure. And the few writers who could manage an hour script were in demand. I lucked out because I had trained over at USC, Erwin R. Blacker, and we studied story structure, and I understood the story structure of an hour show, and was able to come in with a professional level outline for The Trouble with Tribbles, which, based on today's market, it's unsaleable. But at that time, it was all freelancers. You had your executive producer, your line producer, who was your showrunner, and your story editor. That was your staff, and then everybody else was freelance. Now, your producers would get a couple shows, and your story editor would get a couple scripts, but you had 26 slots to fill. And so you needed at least a dozen good freelancers, maybe as many as 18. And if you look at the credits for Star Trek, the original series, there were nearly 60 writers involved for those 79 episodes. Some did multiples, but there were a lot of freelancers, and there were a lot of good science fiction writers, because Harlan Ellison told Gene Roddenberry, hire science fiction writers who know scripts. They will give you a better show. And Gene followed that advice. And so if you look at the credits, you have Harlan, you have Norman Spinrad, you have Richard Matheson, Robert Bloch, Max Ehrlich, Jerry Saul, Jerome Bixby, Dorothy Fontana, who knew his science fiction. I know I'm leaving people out, Theodore Sturgeon, and myself, because I had, science fiction fan since the age of 9, and I knew script writing. So it was a great time to be a freelancer because you could get in with a good outline. You'd submit an outline, and if they liked it, you could sell a script. Today, it's all writers' rooms, and which is there's no market for freelancers anymore. Yeah, and even freelancers have to be a friend of the producer just to get in the door. And if you're not in the writer's room, you're not working.
Now, you put something out there. I remember on your Patreon that went by that was said it was gold for anybody that had wanted to write in Star Trek. It was like, this is what is needed to have a Star Trek script. Is that the standard these days, that create the writings room? Somebody says, okay, every episode you need these elements. Somebody joked about the idiot ball once, and unfortunately I've seen that a little bit too much, but still the whole idea of what is needed for a story of that show.
Let me say it this way, and I'm going to quote Dorothy Fontana, who, God bless her, I wish she were still with us. She understood script writing and the market better than anybody I know. And she was very much against writers' rooms. And she put it this way. It's like, writer's room, you're not going to get the trouble with tribbles. That's not going to, because the writer's room are only going to do what the writers know. But the freelancers will bring in stories that the writer's room didn't think of. The freelancers will bring in stories that expand your universe, whereas your writer's rooms are going to go back to what has been established and do one more literary incest, that's my term, not hers. They're going to, and so you look at the plethora of Star Trek series that Paramount has been doing, and most of the stories they're telling are mining the past. They're going back to already established stuff. And they're not getting at the mission of Star Trek, which I loved the show because it was the most amazing concept for television, is to explore strange new worlds, seek out new life and civilizations. It was to find out what else could be out there. And it was about possibilities. Well, if Star Trek is all about one more story about Klingons or Romulans or Andorians or Kardashians or whatever, you're not going out and exploring anymore. And I think the real magic of Star Trek was, especially that first season where there was real gravitas. You have Devil in the Dark and the Corbomite Maneuver and Balance of Terror and all these amazing episodes. Second season, you had the Doomsday Machine. You had wonderful stories that asked very powerful questions. And Gene Roddenberry was very clear that science fiction was a way to talk about the issues of today without ruffling feathers and still having people think about the possibilities of what we could or couldn't be doing. And he used to say, the way things are is not the way they have to be. And Star Trek was at its very best. That was what Star Trek should be all the time, is making you would turn off the show and then you go out for coffee with a friend and argue for 3 hours.
We can still do that.
Yeah, we can still do that. Now, I people ask me, are you keeping up with the current Star Trek? And I have to say, I am in my post-Trek period. Which means any joy or affection I had for Star Trek was beaten out of me by the certain people at Paramount who were more interested in the bottom line than in making a difference with the stories we were telling.
All I know is that every time when they start sexualizing a character as a main plot, they've lost me.
Yeah,
I do not want to see half-naked Vulcans. I enjoyed the Ponfar episode, but...
Oh, yeah, it was not my favorite episode. And I did not think it was Ted Sturgeon's best either. I think he did better with this side of Paradise.
It was interesting. It gave us something of me in a post-menopausal world. There is kind of a Ponfar feeling about it.
Yeah, all right.
But look, it was spoke to future women, but now it's like I look at somebody and the minute it was they lost me at The Expanse, which was brilliant, right until they had the woman who is in charge say, I don't want to make command decisions, and why don't you take all my clothes off at the same time? And then I'm like, I do not want to watch anymore.
Yeah. Star Trek, the original series, was about pushing boundaries all the time. Star Trek Next Generation was seen as a cash cow. And so there were people on staff, not naming any names, Rick Berman, who said, we can't offend anybody. We can't take chances. We don't want, this show's going to be on at 4 p.m. in some markets. We don't want mommies writing letters. And I said, no, we want mommies writing letters. We want people involved. We want them engaged. And the story I told then, which fell on deaf ears, is something I heard from a theatrical producer, where there was a small theater that took shows on tour in somewhere in like Raleigh. And the theater owner told the guy who's bringing the various plays, don't bring in any, I've got this lady who wrote this letter that she says, I'm offended by all these plays you bring in. She listed all the plays. I've come to every single one of your plays and I'm offended by them. And right, you got it. And the producer had to point out to the theater owner, he says, this is the part of the letter that you want to pay attention to. I've come to every single one of your plays. She's coming to be offended. And the job of the storyteller, and I forget who I'm quoting, it might have been Mark Twain, is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And Star Trek was very good at that in the original incarnation. We got to Next Generation, and very few of the scripts were as challenging as we were promised. The studio first promised us, here's a list of issues you can address. And then when I turned in my script for Blood and Fire, they, we can't do this. Mommies will write letters. I said, that's the point. Uh-huh. But when they said, no, we can't do this. And now, by the way, last week I figured out how I could have fixed that script so we could have done it. But last week it's like a little late. But I'm proud that I didn't compromise, that I said, look, this is what Gene promised. This is what you promised. Why can't we do it? Why are we not going to keep our promises? Because mommies are going to write letters? That's not the Star Trek I was promised.
Well, let's remember that we're now coming to evidence, and I love the paper trails that the internet gives me now, that there are, I believe, 11 people that are writing school systems around the country picking on critical race theory.
Yeah.
So it's 11 individual humans are making that much of a difference, because people are, oh dear, I'm afraid of negative this. Like, whereas I work in the world of marketing often for technology, and I want to tell you there's no such thing as bad press. I want everybody to get up and yell. If every famous person yelled, Jeannie Warner, oh my God, that opinionated bitch, that would be so fabulous. So please feel free to do that, all of you.
Well, I will tell you, I wrote a story called 13 O'Clock, and I sent it off to Gordon Van Gelder at Fantasy and Science Fiction. I said, look, Gordon, and we had a very good relationship. I still think he's a marvelous editor and publisher. And I said, Gordon, you probably shouldn't buy this. It's brutal, it's violent, it's sexy. There's not a lot of science fiction or fantasy in it, but it is one of the best things I've ever written. And I said, oh, you're going to get angry letters if you publish it, but it's one of the best things ever. Well, he sent back a check like 5 days later, 7 days later. It was like, and he bought it immediately. And
that's beautiful.
He published it 13 O'Clock. And it is available. The novel version is on Amazon. So anyway, and sure enough, when it was,
did you get the angry letters?
We got 4 people canceled their subscriptions, and one of them sent the magazine back in shreds. But 7 people subscriptions. Spider Robinson plugged it, and 7 people bought subscriptions. But it was a totally uncompromising story, and any other market would have said, oh, we can't publish this, we'll offend people. But instead, Gordon understood that the job of science fiction is always to push the boundaries of our imagination.
And you know what? So being someone who's actually read that story, I mean, even right now I'm tearing up. I mean, that was such a good story. That was such a powerful story.
I thank you.
I'm so glad that you wrote it and that you had it published.
I wrote half of it and stopped because I didn't know where it went next. And so like 3 or 4 days, I don't know, maybe it's just a fascinating experiment. And then one night I'm lying in bed thinking, and all of a sudden it hit me, this is a Ted Sturgeon story. It's about love. And I realized the scene that takes place in the bar where the narrator says to this boy who's lost his lover, says, you had it. What you had was special. And I realized it was absolutely the right moment in the right story, and the rest of it just fell into place after that. But it took me a while to get there because I did not know where the story was going at first.
But you found it, and it was really good. And oh yeah, by the way, I've also read Hella, which is good, but that's kind of a
Thank you. Yeah,
I want to throw. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say I haven't written a straight white male protagonist in something like 25 years. I'm always looking for, and people have complained, why aren't you writing normal people? I said, I am writing normal people.
Well, okay, if you actually look at the group of people on this call, okay,
Karen, you desperately wanted to be Spock, and we all know that you wanted to grow up to be Leonard Nimoy, and I respect that.
I didn't want to be Leonard Nimoy. I wanted to be Spock. Come on.
Yes, exactly.
But if you look at what you just said, we've got at least 2 gay men. Okay, and then we can move on from there. So.
Yeah, let me segue to a slightly different subject. I know that the writers and the actors are on strike right now, and I think it's important to understand that no civilization is worth anything unless it protects its writers and its artists and its actors and its singers and dancers and creators of all kinds. What we know about medieval Europe, the richness of medieval Europe is go to the Louvre, and here are these marvelous paintings and statues and whatever, and you just go from hall to hall, awestruck at the beauty that they left behind. You go to Rome, you go through the Sistine Chapel, or the other, or you drive up and down Italy, and you go to visit all the little churches, and you see the art. You go to a library and you read Charles Dickens and Victor Hugo and Alexandre Dumas, and you go all the way back to Homer and Aristotle and Aristophanes, and you realize this is the wealth that we have inherited. It more than anything else is that the creative work that people are doing is a cross section of who we are at that moment in time. And writers and actors are on strike today because what we would like is to be able to keep writing and acting. We would like to be able to support our love of the craft. I give you an example. Bob Iger said it's very unrealistic for us to go out on strike. This is a man who is worth nearly $200 million. Or is that $200 billion?
I think it's billion.
$200 billion. And he's talking about how it's unrealistic that I want to pay my mortgage. He's resting on a $40 million yacht, right? And he thinks it's unrealistic of me to want to be able to take care of my kids, to be able to take care of my family. This is a man who makes, I am not making this up, $75,000 a day. You know, the average script writer makes $69,000 a year. And this is a guy who makes more in one day than the average scriptwriter does. The average actor makes only $40,000 a year. And this is a guy who's saying, we're unrealistic. This man is not being realistic. He works for a mouse. And he's not even the worst. We're talking about David Zaslav at Warner Brothers, who's the most hated man in Hollywood. He's worth half a trillion dollars. It's like,
will you all indulge me for a moment where I want to say a quote that's a little bit long from one of our founding fathers on the topic of writing. May I?
Please.
The science of government it is my duty to study, more than all other sciences. The art of legislation and administration and negotiation ought to take the place of, indeed exclude, in a manner, all other arts. I must study politics and war, that our sons may have the liberty to study mathematics and philosophy.
Yes.
Our sons and daughters, throwing the daughters in there, ought to study mathematics and philosophy, geography, natural history and naval architecture, navigation, commerce and agriculture, in order to give their children a right to study painting, poetry, music, architecture, statuary, tapestry, and porcelain.
Okay, that's lovely. Who was it?
That was John Adams.
Oh, excellent.
John Adams' reputation is on the rise, and Thomas Jefferson's reputation is sliding downward, which I think is a good thing. Now, I admire Jefferson for the Declaration of Independence and other work, but when you look at John Adams' history, This nation owes so much to John Adams and his commitment to having a fair government.
Yes.
There's been
Exactly
two miniseries of the Adams Chronicles and then John Adams starring Paul Giamatti. And both of those you come away. And then, of course, there's that marvelous movie, 1776, starring William Daniels, which
we can all quote every word of.
Absolutely. Shut up, John.
So David,
shut up.
yeah. So David, I would disagree with something you said earlier.
Okay.
You said that Iger is worth millions. Okay. No, he has billions.
Yes.
Or billions.
Yeah.
I would not say he's worth that.
Thank you. Thank you for the correction. Yeah. I have something Bob Iger doesn't have. I have enough.
Yeah.
And will he ever have enough?
Anyone who thinks they need more money is putting their attention in the wrong place over here. And I say this over and over, and there are people who look at me oddly. It's like, I don't worry about the money. I worry about making sure my son is taken care of, that my grandkids are taken care of, that my daughter-in-law is taken care of. If they're taken care of, I have enough. And if I have time to write, great. Then I have enough. And I have time to write. So I have enough. I'm happy. I have a good life. I don't have to be a millionaire. I don't have to make movies. I mean, I'd like to. I'd enjoy it, but I don't have to.
Well, what are you working on right now?
Well,
besides moving your family, we understand that's
family
priority.
Comes first. I am working on. Somebody asked me to flesh out a short story, and I'll probably do that this weekend. I'm getting ready for Comic-Con. I'm working on Hella 2, A Handbasket to Hella, and then I'm seriously getting back. All I need is time to review The War Against the Tor and do 3 more chapters on book 5. And
say that again, because I've been mispronouncing that word
Tor,
my whole life.
Chtorr, Tor. There's a little bit of a click in it. So anyway, yeah. So that's the game plan. And when we get to Vermont, I expect to have far fewer demands on my time so that I can sit and write. But there are part of what we're doing over here is Swedish death cleaning. Is as much of and I've said to Sean, we want to keep the music collection and we want to keep the movie collection, and we really have to keep the brag shelf. Well, right there is like that's the storage locker, but I already have 50 years of detritus of all kinds that I have to cull as well, files and I don't need my tax records from 1937, so whatever.
Yeah, I do not envy you because I have done cross country moves many times without kids. So, but you at least have 2 of the most adorable grandchildren.
They are. We all live for those pictures.
Somebody once called Aiden kidnappable adorable, and we all hit the ceiling because we hated the terminology. But I'm willing to call the kids criminally adorable. I was like, they're just, of course, Aiden is you see all the best pictures of him. He's a lot like his daddy. He's independent and he's stubborn and he's joyous and he's having fun but he's got a very strong personality. So,
and I just want to state for nothing that no artificially generated image could have that much love in their tone of voice that you just had telling us about their grandkids. Yeah. So
there is I do believe AI is a valuable tool, but it can never replace the human soul. If at some point, as I have postulated in a couple of my books, we do get artificial intelligence that is self-aware to the point that it's conscious, it's not going to have a human soul. It's going to have a different kind of soul. I don't know what that soul will be. I've postulated that it will have its own selfish interests and a lot of ability to put those interests into power. But I think any truly enlightened intelligence is going to recognize that it has to be partners with humanity, not enemies, because what happens is we can shut it down. The human race has existed for thousands and thousands of years without electricity. And if we ever had to go back to living a more primitive life in order to free ourselves, there will be places where people will do that.
I mean, it's not just Terminator. One EMP takes out my entire industry here in the Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
So
Silicon Valley, and I love the tech advances that the hackers and techies and whatever have created. Hackers in the traditional sense, not they've created marvelous stuff, but
Yep.
My experience of a lot of these guys and some of the women is that they get so wrapped up in writing code that they forget to be human. And then when they start getting these exorbitant salaries, they get a kind of arrogance that they know everything about everything. And no, you're good at writing code. You're good at marketing a product. You're good at that. Great. But don't assume it makes you more human, because there is a kind of a mental attitude in around the tech clusters that is arrogant about the users, which is one of the reasons why so much software is crap, is because they're not coming at it as, assume I'm stupid. I don't want to hunt all over, and I don't want to do 7 clicks. I just want, used to be the theory was, and I did my own program. The theory was if you had to do more than 3 clicks to accomplish something, it's too much.
That is still true.
That is still, and the feature creep in Microsoft Word and Adobe Photoshop. I love all the new things that there. I'm not going to use 90% of them, and they get in the way. I want to be able to edit the menu and make those things go away until I want them back. And every time there's an update that, like Windows 11, it's like everything that I used to know how to work, I have to relearn because you decided you knew better than me how I should work. No. There's a saying in the industry, standards are wonderful. Everybody has one.
Yeah. Yes.
It is so very, very true. Do you have any advice as a final note here to somebody who wanted to, I'm going to say, I could say, because you're a novelist, you're a short story writer, you've written for screenplays and all different things. Pick one of those for an aspiring writer coming out of school saying, I want to be this one day.
Well, Harry Harrison used to say, now I always give credit when I remember who said something. Harry Harrison used to say, apply the seat of the pants to the seat of the chair.
Oh, I like it.
And other people would say, apply the seat of the pants to the seat of the chair and open a vein. What I
like that we in tech say the problem exists between the keyboard and chair.
Right.
So that fits in.
Yeah. What I say is you have something to say it. Don't worry about, what mom is going to think. Say what you have to say, because you might be the only one who can say it the way you're going to say it. And in my writing class, and Karen will validate this, whenever half the time when people ask a question, how do I do so and so, what I always respond is, you're the author, you choose. This is why writing is such a challenge, is because you don't have anyone to turn to and say, how do I do this? Ultimately, it comes back to, you're the author, you choose. This is ultimately also the secret of having a great life. You're the author, you choose. What effect do you want to have in the world? What difference do you want to make? And the more positivity, the more contributions you create, the more joyous life becomes. This is what I know about it. There is no value in negativity. There's no value in divisiveness. There's no value in polarization. There's enormous value in partnership and contribution. And so my advice to writers is choose wisely and put it down on paper, or put it on, actually 90% of writing is staring into a blinding white light bulb and saying, nope, that's not it either. But when you find the right words, as Mark Twain is rumored to have said, but I believe somebody else actually said it, there's a big difference. The difference between finding the right word and the almost right word is the difference between lightning and a lightning bug.
I can see that.
Well, you're right too. It's when people ask that question, it's not just you these days who say you're the writer, you choose. It's the entire class will say, you're the writer, you choose.
Thank you. I think that if you could probably put that on my tombstone, you're the author, you choose. I will be remembered probably for that more than anything else, which is fine. Harlan Ellison's epitaph is, I was here for a little bit, I mattered. Well, that was fine, but I would like to leave something that people can take away with them.
Well, then I'll put that quote on the page, and we will put links to all of the fascinating things we discussed during this episode on our website, which is www.writersdrinkingcoffee.com. David, thank you so much for coming and talking with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. This was great fun, and it was a chance to get out of the house without leaving my chair.
Excellent.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Writers Drinking Coffee, a labor of love and enthusiasm put together by the hosts. Our main web magic is cast by Deirdre Schween, and our sound engineer and backup web spiders are David Welsh and John Schmidt. Our intro and exit music was performed by Michael Ingberg. You can hear more from Michael Ingberg on manyhatsmusic.com. Our podcast sponsors are Jackal Designs, The Bean Scene, Arm Street in Ukraine, with a deep homage to the WGA and respect the strike lines people. And hey, thanks for listening.